Okay, well, thank you, everybody. I apologize for the little hiccup. Technology always keeping us on our toes. So with that, we're 3 minutes past the hour, so let's get started to make sure we honor everybody's time. So first of all, thank you all for joining us today. This is Leticia Emmy from the GIIN. I am joined by my colleagues Adam Dolan and Lisa Glasgow, and we have the pleasure to have Olivia Prentice from the IMP on the line as well. What we are planning to do today is just walk you through how the work of the IMP and IRIS Plus work together. We'll do a few slides and presentations just to set the context and explain a few examples, and then we'll do a very quick demo and we'll open up to questions. Just as a good small housekeeping note, we're keeping everybody on mute just to preserve the quality of the line, but there's a Q&A box that you can see on the bottom left of your screen. So please use that box to ask any questions that you have throughout the webinar, and we'll open up to those questions towards the end. So with that, let's get started. Olivia, anything you want to jump in and say before we kick in formally with the slides?
No, that's great. Thank you for having me. Hi, everyone.
Great. So the objective of today really is to help you all understand how the work of the IMP and the GIIN IMM is complementary, and how we can use IRIS Plus to help manage impact along 5 dimensions, and also to provide a space to discuss and just answer any questions. The plan for the next hour is to do a very brief introduction of both the IMP and the GIIN. We'll go through the fundamentals of impact measurement and management, and how to use IRIS Plus to measure impact along the 5 dimensions. Again, we'll do a very quick IRIS Plus demo, and then we'll open to Q&A. So with that, first in order, very brief introduction. There we go. So in 2018, the GIIN launched the roadmap for the future of impact investing, where we lay down our vision, which is to create a world where social and environmental factors are routinely integrated into all investment decisions. And to realize this vision, the roadmap for the future of impact investing presents 6 categories of action that the impact investing community needs to take on to achieve its potential. And what we're going to be talking about today highlights the first category of action, which is to strengthen the identity of impact investing. And in terms of this action, the GIIN took action in 2 fronts. One was the development of the core characteristics of impact investing, which set the baseline expectations of what constitutes high credible impact investing practice. And the second one was the development of IRIS Plus, which is a system to measure, manage, and optimize your impact, and basically helps with understanding how to implement the core characteristics. This is very timely because, as you all know, the impact investing industry is growing, and our first and recent impact market sizing study estimates the size of the industry at about $502 billion. And at the GIIN, we're focused on scaling the industry with integrity. And at the heart of that is making sure that high quality and strong IMM practice is the norm for all impact investors.
Great, and hi everyone. I'm Olivia Prentice from the Impact Management Project, or the IMP. For those of you that don't know, the IMP is a grant-funded initiative launched back in 2016, which had the aim of building consensus on what we mean by impact, and the aim of co-creating some genuinely agreed norms and guidance for impact measurement and management that is applicable to all enterprises and investors. So the IMP was really launched to address the challenge that all practitioners were experiencing, that they were unable to find detailed guidance on what processes they should put in place to measure, disclose, compare, and improve ESG and impact performance. So that's the vision on there. On the next slide, I'll give a brief overview of our strategy. So from 2016 to 18, we convened over 2,000 practitioners to agree these norms for impact measurement and management. And then we tested the practical application of these norms with working groups of enterprises and investors, which helped us develop more detailed guidance on some shared pain points. For those of you that haven't read about the IMP, please do go to our website where all of the consensus and case studies are available open source. It's impactmanagementproject.com. So moving on to today, the IMP now facilitates the IMP structured network. Sorry, back again to that slide. Thank you. The IMP structured network is effectively a collaboration of those 12 standard-setting organizations that you can see the logos of there, who through their specific and complementary expertise are all aligning their content with these norms, testing them with us, and coordinating efforts between each other to provide these complete standards for impact measurement, management, and reporting. And so the aim really of this network is to ensure that we meet that vision, that together that group of organizations create a set of resources, standards, and tools that help all enterprises and investors measure and manage their ESG and impact. And of course, as you can see, the GIIN is one of those partners. And just to say, for all of you that might not know, the IMP also facilitates an online practitioner community called Managing Impact, which is actually online on Harvard Business Review Idea Lab. So this is specifically designed to ensure that the outputs of the work of the network are practical and respond to your practitioner needs. So different topics are debated each quarter in order to continue to test and share emerging consensus. It's open to all, so please do search for it and sign up to join. So we thought we'd do a brief overview of the IMP. Sorry, go ahead, Leticia.
Sorry. No, so yeah, we just wanted to then start with a brief overview of the fundamentals of impact measurement and management, just to help set the context for our discussion today. So we'll go through a little bit of context setting in terms of the core characteristics and then the 5 dimensions of impact as well. Next slide, please. So the core characteristics of impact investing, as we mentioned earlier, these are the baseline expectations of what constitutes a credible impact investing practice. And basically, it's 4 practices that outline what defines a credible impact investing practice. And those 4 practices are, first, to intentionally contribute to positive social and environmental impact. Second, to use evidence and impact data in investment design. Third, to manage impact performance. And fourth, to contribute to the growth of the industry. So keep that in mind. We'll come back to this, but next we'll go to Olivia to walk us through the 5 dimensions.
Thank you. Yes, so through IMP it was agreed that everything we do has impacts on people and the planet, and that impact is a change in an important positive or negative outcome for people or the planet. And so this means that to understand any impact, we need to understand 5 dimensions of performance, which are those symbols and words on the screen right now. And this means we need data for these 5 questions to understand and compare any impact experienced by people or planet. So to give you a brief overview of the 5, what we call the 5 dimensions of impact, there is what outcome occurs, is it positive or negative, and is it important to the people, planet experiencing it? Who experienced this outcome? What type of stakeholder? Is it the customer, the employee, the environment, and how underserved or in need are they of the outcome, the what? And then how much of that outcome occurs or is needed by that stakeholder in terms of 3 different areas: scale, depth, and duration, which means how many people experience it, what degree of change has that stakeholder experienced from baseline to the outcome level needed, and how long does it last for in terms of the duration of the outcome. So taken together, the what, who, and how much can be used to describe any impact experienced by people and planet. But it was also particularly important for impact investors that we considered contribution. Now, this is very related to the concept of additionality, which is what is the enterprise's contribution to the outcome relative to what would likely have happened anyway. And we specifically use the term contribution to suggest that this isn't always a scientific calculation against a counterfactual. There are, in fact, many ways of thinking about a contribution, like looking at the market availability of that specific outcome for that specific stakeholder in the WHO, and trying to assess whether the enterprise that you're thinking of investing in is likely to be delivering better outcomes, or for many people, or at a greater depth than what would otherwise likely occur. And then finally, the impact risk, which is the risk to the people or the planet that the impact they experience isn't going to occur as they expect. There is far more detail on each of those dimensions on our website, so I'll keep it brief for now. And the next slide, please. So through collaboration with practitioners, many of whom are GIIN members, it was identified that these 15 categories of data are needed specifically to measure each dimension. Now, that might look like a lot there, but as the core metric sets will later illustrate, for a lot of these data categories, we can actually use the same indicator. For example, the outcome level is the same indicator as the outcome threshold, which is the same as the baseline of the outcome, which is in the WHO dimension. So these data points are needed to understand and manage impact performance. And so in this way, they form a sort of helpful checklist for any enterprise or any investor, considering what data they have, what data they don't have, and how much they know about the impacts they're having or seeking to have. And there's a ton more examples of this in practice on our website, so please do have a look at that, or let us know if you have questions about applying this in practice. Next slide, please. And so just to say that it's important to mention briefly why this is so important that we have these core 5 dimensions. And it's really that these are the building blocks of impact measurement, which ensures that any data collected can be comparable, because without full coverage across the 5 dimensions, one impact cannot be compared with another. So, for example, one job created for one type of demographic or WHO might be a very different type of impact to a job created for a different type of stakeholder, and those two should ideally not be compared. But further than that, it also any better methodologies, forms of evaluation on these building blocks used and consistently, which is where I suppose we hope to get to as a market, to a world where actually we do have ratings and valuation methodologies that we can rely on in the market, because we know they have these fundamentals at their core. Next slide, please.
Great. So thank you, Olivia, for that context setting. Now what we thought we would do is to show you how, in practice, you can use IRIS Plus to manage your impact along the 5 dimensions. So as a very brief overview, on the evolution of IRIS to IRIS Plus, many of you on the line know, but we also have a few new faces or voices. So it's always good to just do a quick overview. As you know, the GIIN managed the IRIS catalog of metrics for the last 10 years, from 2009, when IRIS 1.0 was born, until last year, or until May of this year. IRIS was the catalog of generally accepted social and environmental performance metrics. And it was very much what we call it choose your own adventure, where you would just navigate the catalog and find the metrics that were important to you. In May of this year, we launched IRIS Plus, which is a significant evolution from the IRIS you used to know. And we refer to IRIS Plus as a comprehensive system to measure, manage, and optimize impact performance. And IRIS Plus not only has the catalog of metrics that IRIS used to be, which now is the version 5.0, which is aligned to the 5 dimensions of impact, as well as the SDGs, but it also has all in one place core metric sets, which are just short lists of key indicators, and evidence-based and research, best-in-class third-party resources, and practical how-to guidance, all in one place. So in the next few slides, we'll talk about why we developed IRIS Plus, and then we'll get to show you at the end what it looks like and really how can you use it to measure your impact along the 5 dimensions, specifically around the core metric sets. So why we developed IRIS Plus the way it is because based on a very broad stakeholder consultation, we identified some key pain points that the market, but mostly investors, were feeling in terms of their IMM practice. So we developed IRIS Plus to answer these 3 key pain points. The first one is around the lack of implementation guidance. There's broad agreement on conventions, values, and principles, but many times we're hearing investors say that they were having a hard time then bringing those down into practice in their portfolio. The second pain point is around the lack of core metrics and comparable data. To be able to get to comparable or benchmarkable data, investors need to start from a set of core standardized metrics that allow them to track and compare and drive results. And until now, we didn't have a base that had those core metric sets. And the third key pain point is the continuous confusion and fragmentation. This field is evolving very rapidly, and that is very exciting. And at the same time, that also means that there's new tools, resources, and methods coming available pretty much on a daily basis. And it can be overwhelming and really hard to navigate for investors and to know which are the resources that are relevant to them and are best practice versus those that are not. So to help address these three key pain points, we developed Iris Plus, and you'll see how all that works together throughout this webinar. We also spoke earlier about the core characteristics, and so what we decided to do for this webinar is choose 4 practices from the core characteristics to show you how those can be implemented or lived through Iris Plus and in alignment with the 5 dimensions of impact. So the 4 examples that we're going to walk you today are the practices relating to, first, setting transparent impact goals and reviewing the evidence base. Second, identifying qualitative and quantitative indicators to measure performance against those goals. Third, to embed feedback through the life of the investment. And fourth, to disclose impact performance in a comparable manner as much as possible. And so with that, we'll go to review the first one, which is setting impact goals and reviewing the evidence base. Olivia, I'll pass it back to you to frame it.
Thanks. Yes, and I know there's a lot of detail going on this slide, and I think the slides will be circulated afterwards, but we wanted to give you just a really practical example of how, as Leticia said, the Iris Plus system and the 5 dimensions are so complementary. So this first one, setting impact goals. This example aims to show how the 5 dimensions can be used to set goals and guide investment decision making. So in this example, we have looked at the evidence available in Iris Plus about the outcome of financial resilience. And we've used it there on the right-hand side in pink to gather information on what depth and scale of this outcome is needed by different people in different geographies. And so the principle here at work is that reviewing third-party data as an investor is a really useful way to begin to set more specific impact goals. So, for example, the evidence might help identify the exact type of demographic that they should be targeting to really reach those most underserved, in relation to that outcome here. Interestingly, of course, where evidence is sort of least specific tends to be around the how much dimension. So some investors will be able to take a little bit more risk and try and reach as many people at the highest depth as possible. But evidence is beginning to show that those are the models that tend to be least sort of financially sustainable and might require concessionary capital. And so, of course, investors might leave their goals blank for the how much dimension and then see what different investable opportunities are available that firstly meet their financial goals. Leticia, would you add anything on this slide?
Yeah, so thank you, Olivia. So just to talk about the example that we have a little bit here on the slide. So for example, let's imagine that your goal is to help improve financial health. And if you look at existing evidence, for example, what we have here in the slide, is a study done by IPA about the long-term effects of access to mobile money in Kenya. What you can see here is that you're able to answer the questions that the 5 dimensions guide us with this evidence. For example, you can see that interventions to help improve financial health have led to increased financial resilience by increasing savings. In terms of the what, research shows that this outcome is most in need for populations at the base of the economic pyramid, particularly women, given that there's 42% of women in developing countries that are excluded from the financial system. As Olivia was saying, how much will depend on the baseline of each user, and then what is the desired level of savings. In terms of the contribution, what we know based on the evidence is that in most markets where populations are largely underserved or not served by formal financial services, when individuals face a shock, they either might only have the option to go to the hands of a informal moneylender who will not have friendly terms in terms of what's good for the customer, or might spiral into deeper levels of poverty. And then in terms of risk, the risk elements that we've identified based on the evidence first is there is evidence risk in terms of what is the specific outcome level of savings that is satisfactory for the different geographies. We might have that for certain geographies, but we don't have that for all geographies and demographics. So in these cases, each customer would have to be surveyed. There's also stakeholder participation risk, both in terms of use and design of their financial products or services. So just because somebody has access to a savings account doesn't necessarily mean that they use it. And also, we need to make sure that financial products or services are designed to the specific needs of the target population. So those are all examples of what you can learn and be informed based on the evidence. And we'll show you where we have all this evidence base in Iris Plus so that you can consult it when you're setting your goals. So next. Olivia, back to you.
Perfect. Great. So having identified these slightly more specific goals, which are, again, illustratively in that middle column, investors can then turn to the Iris Plus core metric sets, which provide them with the indicators they can use for each dimension. When diligencing new investment opportunities and for ongoing measurement and management, this same set of indicators can therefore be used to assess the fit and performance of each opportunity in a consistent and comparable way, and then compare back to the investor's original goals to see if they might be a fit. So you can see in this illustrative example here, that's based on the evidence available, the investor is targeting a certain demographic and degree of change for the stakeholder based on the evidence that they reviewed. And they are using those metrics on the right-hand side to collect that data on an ongoing basis. Leticia, do you want to talk through the indicators there on the right that are part of the core metric set?
Yes. And so as Olivia said earlier, these can look like a lot, but actually, if you look at the detail, there's a lot of metrics that are being used more than once. And also a lot of these metrics that organizations are already gathering anyway. And we'll show you what this looks like in the Iris Plus system in the core metric sets in a way that might be, for some, easier to digest. But basically what we can see here is that we have, for a specific example, again, on financial health, on the first line, we see what are the specific SDGs that are related to this goal, and then the ones that are also linked but not so closely related. And then we identify the outcome indicator that we're going to use. So if the objective is to measure financial health and we're going to do that through savings, the indicator that we're going to use will be the value of voluntary savings account, which you can see between brackets, there's a code, which means that's an Iris metric. The outcome threshold, as we explained, that's the target value of that indicator as set by the affected stakeholder. To measure the importance of the outcome to the stakeholder, there's an Iris metric. This is the new Iris metric that was incorporated to 5.0 that asks about the importance of the outcome to the stakeholder. When we describe the who, and we look at what the stakeholder farms, so for example, as we say here, those are smallholder farmers. There are specific Iris metrics that can help you describe that those are clients. There might be, for example, farmers and low income. And then the geographic location can be explained through a different set of Iris metrics, which you have the quotes there as well, such as target stakeholder setting and target stakeholder geography, which allow you to say that this is a rural population and in a particular continent or country. The baseline, also as Olivia said before, this is the same indicator that we identified at the outcome level, so the value of voluntary savings account. But what you're looking at here is the value at baseline of that indicator. And then to calculate the scale, what we want to know is the number of clients, individuals that are experiencing the effect, so that have savings accounts and are hopefully experiencing an increase in those savings accounts. So we will look at two IRIS metrics there, which are the client's individuals total together with the number of voluntary savings accounts. To assess the depth, we refer to the same indicator we identified in the what, which is the value of voluntary savings account. But what we will look at here is the change between baseline and the current period in that indicator. And then for duration, IRIS doesn't have metrics, so that's how Olivia referred to using the survey. And for the contribution, as you'll see in the core metric sets, we link to the IMP's guidance. And the type and level of risk, what we've done for the core metric sets is that we note the risk factors that were identified based on research and conversations with stakeholders for this particular strategy. So these are not always going to be the same for all investments and all interventions and all markets, but based on the stakeholder consultation, the ones that were identified as the most common impact risks for this type of intervention are related to evidence risk, stakeholder participation risk, and some other risks. And with that, we'll go into the next slide. Olivia, back to you.
Perfect, thank you. So this is a little bit of an aside just to clarify a common point of confusion. So as we just showed, for most investors, data across the 5 dimensions related to their goals is really sufficient for an investor to ascertain whether the enterprise performance meets their goals. However, of course, there is a lot more data which the investee enterprise themselves need to collect day to day against activities and outputs to manage progress towards these impact goals. And so some of those indicators on the input activity and output side are illustrated here in order to show that these actually tend to be bespoke and are rarely benchmarkable because they're differently specific. And so that is why, and Leticia will talk to this further, but that is why they are not part of the core metric sets, and indeed why you won't find any operational measures within the 5 dimensions, because that is specifically, the 5 dimensions are specifically to understand the impact experienced by the people and planet, not to design measurement system for the business model itself. So just to clarify though, these measures are super important, the input activity output measures you can see here, because of course they ensure the day-to-day business model is delivering the intended results and help with troubleshooting. And of course an investee might ask for some of that data too. Sorry, an investor might ask for some of that data too. So if they get the results back across the 5 dimensions and see that their goals aren't met, for example, if the clients aren't as low income as they'd hoped they would be that are receiving this particular financial product, they might look to see, well, how are clients being gathered onto the program? How are they being targeted? What materials are going out as advertisements? And try and troubleshoot any problems with the business model that is preventing the target impact being delivered. And so we just wanted to share this in here to prevent confusion about, the how of the impact business model being delivered versus the impact performance against the 5 dimensions, as that is also a section of the IRIS Plus core metrics. And of course, it's worth saying that of course engaged investors might also ask their investees to share these indicators and data alongside that impact data, particularly if they are providing hands-on suggestions on how to measure and manage impact in a more day-to-day sense better, and to help them improve and make decisions about impact performance on both the negative and the positive outcomes. So Leticia, did you want to add to any of that?
Excellent. No, that was super clear and helpful. We'll see. Thank you for that explanation, and I think it's very good very helpful also to explain why we added that section into the core metric set. So as Olivia said, and we'll see in a quick demo we'll do how we haven't added that to the core metric set, but it's separate from the 5 dimensions, and we even have it in a different color just to make sure that we differentiate that this is not one of the 5 dimensions. But similar to what Olivia was saying, the reason why I incorporated it is this was based on feedback from stakeholders involved, that it was important for them to help them understand the performance of or the activity of an enterprise. So we wanted to include it, but it definitely is not one of the 5 dimensions. So with that, we'll go to the next slide.
Great. So this is just to share one of the most important parts of impact management, which is to ensure that an enterprise or an investor is not only measuring and managing the intended positive impacts. And so one way to ensure this isn't happening is to survey all stakeholders of an enterprise, be that the employees, suppliers, customers, etc., to discover which other important impacts are happening, as this then helps enterprises and investors identify indicators to measure and manage these on an ongoing basis. Of course, this is particularly important for any negative impacts that might be occurring alongside those positive ones, and of course wouldn't be intended, so be important to understand in order to mitigate the risk of any harm occurring for any stakeholders of the enterprise. On this slide here, you'll see a couple of survey questions that can be used across the 5 dimensions as a starting point, which, of course, you can tailor to your individual needs, but that can often be quite helpful as an initial data gathering exercise, and, of course, can also be comparable if wanting to compare some results for one business with another. As you can see, there's a link in there, but which will take you to a pilot study that the IMP did with 60 decibels, which is the spin-out of Acumen, and Keystone Accountability. And what we did was test some survey questions like these ones here across the 5 dimensions with about 8 different businesses globally to see whether they were effective in doing just what I mentioned there about uncovering these unintended impacts, figuring out which ones are the most important ones to those experiencing them, and then making sure that they are managed and measured on an ongoing basis. So do have a look at that report if you're needing a little bit of help thinking about surveying. And of course, the GIIN has also produced some guidance on the practicalities of carrying out these surveys, which there's a screenshot there on the right. But Leticia, do you want to talk to that a bit further?
Sure. So exactly as Olivia was saying, integrating the voice of affected stakeholders is something that it's at the heart of impact measurement management, but also we want it from the IRIS Plus side, make sure we help also standardize in terms of how to measure it. So there's a couple of things that we did with IRIS Plus. One is that each core metric set has 2 metrics. One is, as you saw before, the importance of the outcome to a stakeholder, and the other one is a metric around the involvement of stakeholders in the design, development, and delivery of products and services, to make sure that we help standardize and track the involvement of stakeholders. And that is just a starting point. It's by no means meaning that that is all the involvement that you have to do. Those are just some metrics to help standardize, which should be also supplemented with specific surveys, as Olivia was saying, to also help illustrate what does it look in practice, both the implementation of these metrics and also why incorporating stakeholder voice is important. We developed a short guidance piece together with NPC, and we have an example from Genesis in South Africa. And you can see the screenshot here, and we have it on our website as well, just to help also make sure that this practice becomes common practice for all enterprises and investors.
And just to mention another resource that you might find helpful is everything at Social Value International and Social Value UK, who have produced a lot of guidance about how to identify stakeholder groups and important outcomes, which is incredibly valuable. And so finally on this slide, the result obviously of all of this surveying and data collection should be a dashboard of important positive and negative impacts for an enterprise to manage. An investor might of course not choose to look at all of those in its reporting, but at least an investor should make sure that enterprises are collecting that negative data to manage those risks. It's probably also worth mentioning for those of you still nervous about the amount of data required that actually not all impacts will need full coverage across the 5 dimensions, for example, if they're ESG risks. And so we can talk a little bit more about that in the Q&A if that's helpful.
Yeah, and then to add quickly, as Olivia mentioned, SVI has done a lot of great work on this, and there is a lot of great work that has on guidance that has been done on incorporating stakeholder voice. we didn't want to reinvent the wheel by any means. So the piece that we developed is actually quite short, and it links and mentions all the other guidance pieces that have been developed and are more extensive. But with that, next slide.
Perfect. So this is almost the final step in that series that we showed up front, which is, of course, importantly disclosing impact performance. And the IMP heard that it was very important when disclosing data to keep all of these outcome data points in context, which really means that ideally all data across the 5 dimensions is shared together as a set rather than aggregating data across the dimensions. For example, typically impact reports tend to add up the scale across different businesses. So would add those 2 numbers on the screen there, which are very, very tiny on my screen, so I can't read them out. There we go, 2,850, and would add that up, which of course prevents the comparability of that company A results with company B by adding that in a way that actually does not enable good analysis. So the norm here that is emerging is that where possible, particularly within investment value chains, encouraging companies and investors to share with each other this data in these full sets in a comparable way with indicators and ideally also data sources better enables everybody to assess performance, identify data gaps, and really move towards understanding what good looks like for the people or planet experiencing the impact, and how we can all identify business models that are more likely to create that impact. Leticia, over to you.
Excellent. And then we'll move to your next slide.
Perfect. Yes. So this is just a bit of a gentle reminder that to say, of course, what we focused on in this webinar is measuring across the 5 dimensions, because I think that is still where a lot of work needs to be done, and there is a lot of pain points experienced by investors doing that. But we did want to make sure that to clarify that one of the really important norms coming out of the IMP was to ensure that investors, when thinking about their impact of their portfolio or individual investments, separate the impact of the underlying enterprise across the 5 dimensions, as we've just looked at, with the impact that they have through contributing to the impact of the enterprise, and that there are broadly 4 strategies that an investor employs to do that, which are in those boxes there. They might signal that impact matters by prioritizing impact measurement. They might engage actively to share expertise. They might grow new or undersupplied capital markets by taking disproportionate risk or liquidity for the sake of impact, or they could provide flexibility on risk-adjusted return for the sake of impact. And increasingly, it's becoming normative that investors should clarify which of these strategies they're intending to employ when making investment decisions and managing a portfolio, which eases matching of intention with other investors, and of course matching with enterprises themselves as well. And there's much more information about that, actually both on the Harvard Business Review platform that I mentioned earlier, but also on the IMP website.
Great. So now into how we can bring some of what we discussed today into practice with Iris Plus. I'll walk you through how these steps can be mapped with Iris Plus, and then we'll go into a quick demo just to see it all in practice. But basically, with Iris Plus, you can set and identify your impact goals, either by SDG or by impact category and theme. You can get access to the evidence base so that you can review it, and we saw the importance of that in an example earlier. And you can then explore the core metric set, which are these short list of key indicators. And we know that core metric sets are just a very important building block to be able to have comparable data, but those will, of course, not capture the entire metrics or indicators that an investor or a social enterprise needs to measure, because there's particular needs and preference of each that only you know. So that's why core metric sets allow you to customize, and we'll show you how to do that. Each core metric set to add any new indicators or metrics that are important to you. And then we also discussed about the importance of integrating feedback and using this data to inform decision making. On that, we have 2 guidance pieces. One we discussed before around how to incorporate stakeholder voice with Iris Plus, and the other one is an example on how to use Iris Plus for decision making, where we partner with Unitas Fund, which belongs to Capria, to map what their fund impact performance looks like through a core metric set. And that also helps disclose impact data in a comparable way. So with that, we're going to move to a super quick demo just to see how all this comes together in practice. And then we're going to open up to questions. So we are now moving to the Iris Plus website. We tested this earlier, and it looked like the website had a little bit of a lag. So I am going to go slow, allowing for that. But please use the chat box to let us know if this is not working. So just to start, let's imagine that you go to the homepage of Iris Plus and you sign in to access your profiles that you have created. So you click on sign in, and if you already created an account and you have any profiles created, the system remembers you, so it's very easy to go back and find what you created. We were talking before about an example in financial health, so I'm going to go here just to see where you can find all the different pieces that we have been talking about. So when you click there on financial health, you will see a lot of information being provided to you in different pieces. So the first tab that you'll see here is just a summary of what an investment in improving financial health typically looks like, and what are the SDGs that are mostly directed, related to it, and then also linked to. So these, if you remember in a few slides ago, we saw the SDGs, and this is now, you see it here in the core metric sets in a more illustrative way. The next tab, which is called the overview, here's where we looked at the research and the evidence to answer the questions along the 5 dimensions. So when you remember when we went through that example, for example, on the study on the IPA study, here's where you can see for each of these questions, what is the problem aiming to assess? What does the research say? You know, why is financial health important? What does it look like? What is the scale of the problem? Who typically is in most need of this type of investment or intervention? How much of change can you expect? What likely the contribution might be on the enterprise side? And then what are some of the risk factors that have been identified for interventions or investments in improving financial health? And then it also has some examples of illustrative investments in this area. So this is just the research, and it's to help inform or advocate what do investments in this area look like, and also to help you communicate the magnitude of the problems that you're trying to solve. We also have an evidence-based in here. Here you can see basically the different studies that back the connection between the strategy that we're talking about, which is improving financial health, with different specific outcomes. So just by clicking on one of them, you'll see all the different studies that prove that connection, and then you'll see the rigor of the study on the right-hand side with those stars, which are along the NESTA standards of evidence. But what I wanted to show you also is what the core metric says. So here's where we'll see what we were talking before, illustrated by the core metric set. So we have it by the 5 dimensions. So for example, in what is the goal, we refresh what the objective of the intervention is, which is improving financial health. And then what outcome indicator are we going to use to track this goal? So the outcome in this case is increased savings, and we're going to measure that through value voluntary savings account, which is this specific IRIS indicator. So again, you see your outcome indicator there as well, which is a specific IRIS metric, and it tells you how to calculate it. And as we mentioned before, we also have a new indicator about the importance of outcome to a stakeholder. All the indicators in IRIS Plus come with this section called Why is this important?, which basically helps you understand what are the insights that you can learn from this data. It shows you the standard IRIS metric, and if you click on that metric, you can see the definition of the metric, how in what format it is to be reported and whatnot. And it also has formula or calculation guidance. And you can see that in each of the indicators. Some indicators might require more than one IRIS metric. And so in those cases, the formula calculation guidance it's very important to walk you through how to calculate these indicators in a way that is clear and comparable and leads to consistent data. And then on contribution, we link to the IMP's guidance. On risk, we mentioned the factors we talked about before. And here's where we were talking about before, also this section on how is change happening, where we added a few indicators based on feedback we received. But as you can see, this is done in a different color, and to illustrate that this is not part of one of the 5 dimensions. But as we were discussing with Olivia before, it can be very important to also understand performance and other effects along this. Here also you'll see this customize button. So here's where you can customize and add any metrics from the IRIS catalog of metrics that you like to your core metric set. You can't add it to the 5 dimensions because we want to respect the integrity of that set. But here, any additional metrics or metrics related to the activities or the how change is happening can be added there. All this information can be downloaded. So when you go to Downloads, that tab, you're able to download, click on there, and you will be able to download a spreadsheet with all your core metric set. And if you added any indicators or metrics to your core metric set, those will be added. And if you click on this button called Share, you'll get a quick link, very similar to a Google document, that you can share with your investees or your team or with anybody else so they can see your profile as well. I could stay here and tell you a lot more things, but I'm conscious of time, and I want to make sure that we have time for questions. We have been getting a number of questions throughout this, through the chat box. So I'm going to start reading some of them and directing, Olivia, some to you, and some others we can jump. Lisa, do you want to jump in? And
Sure. I'll just read from the top. So, Great. This should be better, right? Okay, so just reading a couple of questions that have come in. One is, so setting impact goals and metrics must begin with an evidence base, or can it start simply with a program's vision of success and the outcomes it wants to achieve? I imagine both Leticia and Olivia have thoughts on this. Leticia, let me throw it over to you first.
Sure. So at the GIIN, we believe that strong impact investment strategy should be evidence-backed when that is possible and when evidence exists. Luckily, as we show, IRIS Plus does a lot of that homework for you because we bring the overview and the evidence that pulls together from academic and field literature and insights from hundreds of experts and practitioners around the world. But that also acknowledging that that's for the themes where IRIS Plus has coverage. There's a lot that we don't have covered yet and will develop over time. That's our take. Olivia, anything you will add there?
Yeah, I mean, I would just say that, of course, it really depends on the model in question, but ideally, setting goals is a triangulation of 3 different pieces of information: a program's vision of success, which could be phrased as its intentions, third-party evidence, and direct evidence collected by the enterprise itself about its performance. So, for example, if your enterprise had a program had a vision of success that was to get more truant children into school, you would naturally probably always start with, well, why do I think this is going to be successful? And there might be some great first-hand evidence that you have from your program, but if not, then third-party evidence is a great place to start. Otherwise, of course, we could be wasting money on programs that don't have a chance of achieving impact, and which ultimately really means that we might not be putting money towards programs that are more likely to create that impact. And of course, that would be problematic for achieving the SDGs.
Completely agree. Thank you, Olivia. I will actually send the next one directly to you again. The question is, how can social enterprises use these resources, specifically the impact data categories and core metric sets, in their theories of change? And the context there is, we're a social enterprise and don't have a ton of budget to get a measurement expert, so something like this would be quite helpful to us.
Great, yes. Well, please do go to the enterprise section of the Impact Management Project website. There's a downloadable Excel file there, which effectively can be used as a starting point. It's quite prescriptive, so can also be used as a checklist if that's easier. Just to say, okay, what type of impact do I think I'm going to have, and then what data do I already have to know about what impact is occurring. And so really that's how I'd recommend starting with those 5 dimensions and those 15 data categories there. And then, as you say, over time, as you maybe gather more information or get more budget, you can start to fill in those gaps. But it's important to say that those 15 data categories are very much a kind of an ambition in terms of data coverage. It's completely okay if at the beginning you only have data from maybe 2 or 3 different areas.
Yeah, I completely agree. I mean, we always say, start where you are and grow from there. I'm sure that there's data that you're already tracking. And also all these tools and guidance are all public goods. So it will definitely require staff time to go through them and get, collect the data that you already have, but there's no cost in terms of starting to implement using the IRIS Plus system or going through all the wealth of materials that the IMP website has.
And there's a nice follow-up on that question. So could someone ask IMP or IRIS Plus folks to get them started on their specific project? In other words, is there a hands-on training session using the project or a step-by-step guide to walk someone through the process from beginning to end? Would you say?
Sure. So I would say on the IRIS Plus side, we have a few demos that we've done online, and we're happy to share that link if that's helpful. We also do in-person workshops as we can around the world. We're going to be at the GIIN Investor Forum in Amsterdam at the beginning of October, and in SoCup later in October. And then we also do, for our members, we do one-on-one consultations and specific workshops around them. But I would say we have an open also working group that everybody's invited to join. So if you're interested, please follow up with us and send us your email, and we'll add you to the group, and that will be a great way to join the conversation. Olivia, on your end?
Yeah, so we don't provide training other than, of course, working with all of the partners in the structured network to support alignment of their training. So do look for resources on our partner websites. And, of course, everything, all the guidance that we've created over the last couple of years is open source on our website. In particular, I would highlight the latest updates section, which has the practical examples and case studies. Do get in touch with us, though, if you'd like to talk through anything that isn't clear from what's on the website.
Wonderful. I'm going to try to squeeze 2 more questions in. One is, are there specific data providers that currently utilize a report on the 5 dimensions in IRIS Plus? Olivia, can I send that to you first?
Are you able to clarify what we mean by data providers? Do we mean
Yeah, I would imagine like platforms.
So. The person who wrote in is welcome to clarify as well.
I mean, I guess on a high level, and Leticia, you probably know this better from an IRIS perspective, but on a high level, I think there is a real push at the moment to encourage most data platforms and systems to align with a shared taxonomy that will help over time for lots of different data sources to be pulled together in a comparable way. And of course, aligning on indicators like IRIS Plus has done is a really great starting point to this. I think the next step is probably to join it up with the other taxonomies out there as well, which I know there is a ton of work being done on already, such as GRI and SASB and BLAB and other indicator frameworks, as well as data sources like the different platforms that are out there. And I won't mention any because there are so many and I don't want to kind of accidentally prioritize anybody. Leticia, would you add to that?
Yeah, no, that's an excellent point, actually, and you probably saved me because I was about to mention a few that I had in mind, but yeah, I don't want to mention some and then maybe leave out some others that I might not be coming to mind or I might not know. But also, just so you know, I think there's a lot of, the person who asked this question, there's a lot of interest in not only demand, but also I think from the field builders like us in terms of helping connect and make sure that there is interoperable data all along so we can facilitate the sharing of data through the common language.
Mm-hmm. And then last question that I'll throw out is, how will each of these tools develop further over time? What's next for each of these projects? Olivia, can I send that to you?
Sure, well, I'll be brief because I think I kind of tried to illustrate up front what we're trying to do. But the IMP itself is really just trying to coordinate. We are facilitating this network of 12 standard setters to make sure that now practitioners like yourselves who are coming to try and piece together which resources they should use for which are finding everything increasingly aligned and based on these same norms and fundamentals. And I think so that's really the future of IMP, is to ensure that really it isn't needed, because all of the norms that were created by this practitioner community are already embedded in these tools and resources. Iris Plus being a great example, because as you'll have seen in the demo, you can already toggle the indicators by those 5 dimensions. But Leticia, do you want to talk about the future of Iris Plus?
Yes, thank you. So Iris Plus is an ongoing development. We launched in May of this year, and we have coverage of a number of areas, 6 areas around financial inclusion, affordable housing, smallholder agriculture, access to health, and gender lens. And we will, on an ongoing basis, be developing and launching more. So the ones that are coming later this year are sustainable water management, sustainable forestry, and education. And then in 2020, we're going to launch
2 more. We have clean energy on there as well, and then water, sanitation, and hygiene will also be launched this year.
Okay, perfect. And then we're also launching themes around jobs and climate mitigation, and we'll continue to develop and launch them on an ongoing basis. We're also going to continue to work on guidance in areas where we find that there's need for guidance. Then we'll typically partner with experts or with investors to highlight their practice. And the ongoing development of Iris Plus, the content is all developed through our Navigating Impact project. So if you're interested in taking part in any of these developments, please get in touch with us. You can use the chat box or email us at iris@thegiin.org, and we'd love to loop you in. So with that, we're officially at the hour, and I want to respect everybody's time. We recorded today's session, so if you would like to hear it again, or you know somebody in your team who missed it and would like to listen to it, you can email us and we'll send it to you, but we'll be posting it on the Iris Plus website, so you can access it. So thank you, Olivia, so much for joining us today, and thank you all on the line for being with us, and we'll be in contact. Thank you.
Thank you so much, GIIN team, for having me. Bye, everyone.
Bye, everybody.